For the next hour, you'll be leaving the Show Me state and entering the Show Me the Money state. So stop what you're doing, grab a pen, and get ready to learn. Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group will be your guide for straight talk and honest answers about living the life you deserve in retirement. So prepare to be empowered. Now, here are your Show Me the Money hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shade.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Welcome to Show Me the Money, the radio show that gives you the straight talk and honest answers you need to help you reach your wealth management and retirement goals through smart investing and careful planning. On today's show, we're going to be talking about current events, and then we'll dive in depth into the big, beautiful bill, an overview and key impacts on investors and retirees. My name's Jeff Shade, and as always, you know I'm just here to ask the questions for you. But the words of wisdom and solid advice, they come from Jake Floyd here of Floyd Financial Group. Good morning, Jake. How was your 4th of July weekend? And how are you doing today?
You know, it was very, very good. And as I always go on and on about our country, but I love America, and it's a great week, and we had a good weekend. We didn't blow anything up or off other than what we're supposed to. And so I consider that a victory. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the bill too, because I think there's a lot of things in here that are going to drive asset prices forward.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. We had the Rockets red glare out here in front of my American flag and my front lawn as well, too. I hope everybody else had a great weekend. But let's move on and talk about the big, beautiful bill. Now, we're going to do that here in just a moment. This is a rather historic occasion. I mean, it was signed by the president on July 4th. How fitting is that? But let's start off with some current events. Jake, I understand Jaguar sales down 97.5%. Jake, what could cause Jaguar to fail so spectacularly?
Yeah, the latest edition of Go Woke, Go Broke, known as Jaguar. I don't know if people listening saw the commercial that was out there. If you haven't seen it, I apologize in advance. If you go watch it, it's pretty awful. But basically, it's a bunch of people that you would not know what gender they are dancing around, and it looks like a New York runway kind of a thing. It almost looks like a fashion show. And then at the end, it just says Jaguar. And so like these people are running around everywhere. And there's no cars in the commercial at all. And this has probably been maybe a year ago or so. They changed the logo of Jaguar and all that. And so as a result, in April of 25, they sold 49 cars.
Oh my gosh.
Total. And you're talking about a brand that was a global powerhouse not too terribly long ago. So again, if you bow to these people who are not your customers, apparently it doesn't go well.
Well, I wonder what brilliant mind came up with that idea. As you said, you're selling cars, but there are no cars in the commercial, and you're appealing to a demographic that probably is not interested in ultra-luxury automobiles. So again, this is rather puzzling. I think Jaguar's kind of gotten what they deserve. Do you think that there's a chance that they're going to change strategies here?
If they sold 49 cars, I would assume they're either going to change strategy or they're going to go away. I mean, you can't make ends meet on that. Now, somebody may buy them out for pennies on the dollar, but I don't know what their plans are. But again, in business, a 10% decline in sales would be crippling. 97.5% is generally a death sentence.
Okay, let's talk about tariffs a little bit. We had this July deadline now for the tariffs. I understand that it's been now pushed back a bit.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be July 9th that the tariff pauses were going to expire, and anybody who didn't have a deal was going to get a giant tax increase. But Trump over the last week or so has been downplaying that deadline and then basically said, well, maybe we'll give it to the end of the month. And then most recently, I think it was Tuesday morning, he sent out a whole bunch of letters and basically said, yeah, those are deals. Here's the deal. Here's what we're going to charge you, and here's what you're going to do. And so for some of the other countries, there's not so much negotiation. We're just telling them how it is. So I think we're going to see the tariff talk start to really fade into the background, and it's not going to be a real forefront kind of an issue unless we see China or somebody really start to go around and violate the agreements that they have made. I would expect maybe a little pressure on the BRICS nations. You know, they just had their summit on Monday last week. So you're probably going to see Trump push back against that. Overall, though, I think you're going to see the tariff talk kind of go away. All eyes are going to be on earnings season next week. You know, this follows the earnings season that they had in April, where they all sandbagged their numbers, saying that tariffs were going to kill them and, hey, we don't think we're going to do as much business. So it's likely a lot of these numbers are going to blow out of the water. So it would not shock me to see stocks tick higher as they start to price in higher earnings numbers. because a lot of the earnings expectations are based off of what they had guided last quarter. And so it's likely they're going to outperform a lot of those numbers.
So I understand that Trump has threatened 25% tariffs on Japanese and South Korean imports. But as you said, all this tariff and trade war talk, it doesn't seem to have caused people to adjust their spending habits, or has it?
So a lot of the tariffs are being eaten by the companies right now. When you look at like Walmart or Toyota, a lot of them the car companies are just eating the tariffs. So there's not a lot of price fluctuation yet in the underlying vehicles or whatever we're talking about. So I think from that standpoint, I think we're probably going to get a deal with both those nations that will satisfy Trump and will not cause us to have higher prices there. But that remains to be seen.
All right, let's continue our conversation here with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group, talking about current events. By the way, our telephone number this morning, if you'd like to get in on the conversation or at least have a conversation with Jake, 417-889-7233. That's a chance for you to request your Floyd Financial Group retirement review, where you can talk about these things with Jake and how they might affect your retirement. 417-889-7233. So April earnings season, as you said, some of the companies sandbagged their particular earnings results, but we do have an earnings season coming up here in about a week or so. Do you have any idea, or what's your feeling on what we're going to hear from this earnings report coming up here in just a week or so?
I think we're going to hear a lot less about tariff uncertainty. I think one of the things that may start to become more a talking point, though, is if Elon keeps pushing his new third-party political party here, there may be some CEOs that start to reference that and say, hey, that could affect policymakers looking forward as we come into primary season and all that kind of thing. It may be a little early for some of that. It kind of depends on the industry, but we had the IRS last week ruled that churches and not-for-profits can now endorse political candidates without losing their tax-exempt status. So generally when you go to vote around here, a lot of them are at churches, and they're very careful how they put the signs a certain distance from the polling place and all that. I think that part of it you'll still see, but I think you'll see churches and other organizations really start to push political candidates where they haven't, and they've shied away from that in the past. And then we talked, I think, a little bit last week about Mr. Zoran Mondami that's running for mayor of New York City. I think that political uncertainty will start to be something they talk about. I don't know if it'll be this quarter. It might be next quarter, though.
Jake, not that long ago, we were talking about TikTok and the fact that it was going to be going away because we thought that maybe the Chinese were involved. Well, I think we had a pretty reasonable expectation that the Chinese had their fingers in that. What is the latest news on TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, Trump has said that the deal is basically done. However, we don't really know any of the players that are bidding. I mean, we know some of them that are bidding, but we don't know who's leading the bidding, I guess. There's 5 or 6 mega corporations that are bidding. It wouldn't shock me to see Elon bidding. We know Meta was very interested in potentially picking up TikTok. I would personally have some antitrust concerns about that one, just because Meta is kind of a direct competitor with Reels, and one of the only direct competitors, really. But it'll be interesting to see who he allows to have that. And it's kind of interesting how it's a little behind closed doors and he's making these deals, and he's ultimately deciding who gets to have that deal. We'll see if China agrees that they're as close as Trump thinks they are, probably in the coming days.
Well, I have to admit, Jake, and as an older person, I have never seen anything on TikTok at all. I don't know if I'm in the minority there. I'm still stuck in Facebook and maybe the Reels and so forth, but I've never used TikTok. But I understand that that was one of the things that people were worried about with TikTok, was that apparently it's a Chinese company and there was possibly some spying going on, or maybe some information that was gathered through people watching that.
Oh, yeah. So China is definitely, the Chinese government has backdoor access to all of TikTok. And that's really the inherent problem, is that Chinese are using it to spy on Americans and gather data that can potentially be used in nefarious ways. So Trump is basically giving an ultimatum of either an American company buys TikTok out or we ban it from America. So I think we're likely going to see it get bought out. The valuation will likely be pretty rich, just because TikTok is generally the most downloaded app on the App Store. To your point, Jeff, though, about TikTok, I don't have TikTok on my phone either. I see a few excerpts from it on other social media platforms or on the internet, but I've never actually been on TikTok.
Neither have I.
I don't really want to expose my privacy to have that on my phone, because there's a lot of permissions you give when you download TikTok for them to access the rest of your phone and access even your conversations when your phone is locked and things like that. So I don't have it on my phone.
Yeah, I have always been mysteriously amazed at the fact that I can be talking about something at the dinner table and all of a sudden these things start showing up on my phone that relate to what I was talking about. I've always wondered how that happened, but anyway.
So TikTok started that, but Facebook also does that. So if you have Facebook on your phone and you have permissions given, it will do the same thing. I'm less worried about Facebook having access to my information than I am TikTok, though, because the Chinese government isn't piddling around in there. I don't know that either one of them is great, but I have less problem with Meta than I do with ByteDance, which is who owns TikTok currently.
We can't end a conversation here about current events without talking about the market. The market just continues to run, Jake, and for no explainable reason. Do you think that there's anything that's going to stop this market here in the second half of the year?
So I do think there are some things that could potentially stop it, but if you're asking me to predict, I would say that the market probably ends up another 5 to 7% higher than it is right now by the end of the year. As far as why it's moving, I mean, I think that there are so many things you could point at that are driving future return expectations. So one of them is this bill we're going to talk about for pretty much the rest of the time, so I won't go too deep into that. But the tax cuts and things there, as well as the child accounts and things that have to go straight into the stock market to, if you have forced buying into the stock market, that's going to drive stock prices. AI, I think, is probably the biggest one that still people are trying to figure out how to price it in. AI has a huge deflationary effect on the economy, because if you start eliminating jobs, then people start competing for those jobs, which means lower wages. One of the reasons why Trump is so against Jay Powell is because he knows that we're going to have this giant deflationary effect called AI, and that's why he's not worried about too much more inflation looking forward, and I think that's probably correct. But I would just say that, there's probably 30 things I could point to that are likely going to drive markets, and I think the market is pricing those in steadily as we look forward. I do think markets are a little bit stretched as far as valuation, but if these companies next week and the following couple of weeks deliver on their earnings, then all of a sudden they don't look as stretched and they have some more legs to run. So typically the July earnings season is a pretty good time for investors. If you look historically, it's almost like a second Santa Claus rally through the mid part of July because of earnings. So we'll see if that holds true this time.
Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group. We're talking about current events, and of course, we're going to be talking about the big, beautiful bill here in just a moment. If our conversation resonates with you, you'd like to get in and sit down with Randy or Jake at Floyd Financial Group and talk about your journey towards a confident retirement. We are offering the Floyd Financial Group Retirement Review at no cost, no obligation, and no judgment. You can get yours by calling 417-889-7233. It's just a casual conversation between you and Jake and Randy whenever he's in the office. And again, it's designed to allow you to ask the questions to get the answers that you need to put you on a path towards a confident retirement. Again, no cost, no obligation, 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, let's take a quick break. When we come back, one big, beautiful bill. That's what we're talking about when Show Me the Money continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready for another helping of some more real money talk? Thought so. Now, here's another serving of Show Me the Money with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this segment, we're going to be talking about the big, beautiful bill.
And Jake, I've heard it called one big, beautiful bill. I've never heard it called by anything other than that. Why does Trump call it this one big, beautiful bill?
Well, a lot of it's because it's a big, beautiful bill, Jeff. What I would say is, it's like 950 pages or something like that. And it's a big, sweeping tax reform. And then there's a lot of other things that are in there that instead of trying to pass all this stuff independently and taking forever to do it, Trump wanted to put it all together to get it done, in this case before the 4th of July, but definitely before midterm elections happen in case we risked our majority in both houses. Now, I think that him calling it the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is hilarious to me. That's going to be what you read about in history books 40 years from now, is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Well, Jake, I understand the White House celebrated it as the greatest tax reduction and largest border security investment in American history, per Trump's remarks. Industry and retirement groups hailed it as a win for savers and investors. Why is it a win? How is it a win?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it would be a catastrophe if we allowed the tax cuts to expire that were supposed to expire at the end of this year. That would by itself cause a recession if you had just a massive tax hike across the board. So that part's a big win. But there are a lot of little things in the bill that are going to create more revenue looking forward. The average person, I believe, is going to save about $2,600 a year in taxes based off of this bill, which is partially what the opposition doesn't like about it, either whether you're Rand Paul and you're worried about spending or you're a Democrat, they're worried that the billionaires are going to get more billioned. I always find that argument very interesting because who cares if the rich get richer as long as the bottom gets brought up? If you're a Democrat and you're wanting people to have a better quality of life. I mean, if we look at life 50 years ago in this country or 70 years ago, you think the bottom of people are more wealthy today than they were then? For sure.
Yeah.
I'd say the bottom people are more wealthy today than the middle class was 60, 70 years ago. So there's a lot of whiners out there about how bad they have it when they can't get their triple dip macchiato latte thing. But in the grand scheme of things, people have it pretty good in today's world. And that's part of the problem is there's not enough to whine about. So we start manufacturing things to whine about, like gender ideology or some insanity. I think that if people were more worried about killing their next meal so they could eat, they'd probably not be focused on such things.
Jake, how does this bill differ? We said that it was going to extend the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. How does it differ from the original TCJA?
So one of the big things, Jeff, that's different is the SALT cap, right? So SALT stands for state and local tax. But basically, if you live in a high state income tax state, you actually get double taxed on that money. And so they raised the cap from $10,000 to $40,000. So that actually helps us here in Missouri. If you're a higher earner or if you have big capital gains or something like that, that'll save you quite a bit of money in taxes. Generally speaking, though, people aren't happy about it because it benefits California and New York and New Jersey the most because of their high state tax rates. So investors are obviously going to be buoyed by the fact that this will likely drive asset prices looking forward. If we have significantly lower interest rates, and we talked about AI being deflationary, if we have that deflation coupled with lower interest rates, coupled with tax savings, coupled with corporate tax savings, which then they either use for R&D or they pay back to shareholders, there's going to be a lot of pro-business type things happening. As we look at the individuals, according to whitehouse.gov, the average family will increase their take-home pay $7,600 to $10,900 per year. Workers are projected to see an increase of real wages of $4,000 to $7,200 annually. Now, again, I'm sure these numbers are in the future. It's not going to be like snapping our fingers, but generally speaking, there's just a lot of really pro-growth things in this bill, including probably one of my favorite parts of the bill from a stock market, real estate, just asset price standpoint is the Trump accounts, is what they're being called, or Trump called them MAGA accounts. But basically, every child born in the United States is going to get $1,000 put into an account with their name on it from the government. That part's kind of okay. Obviously, I don't really love the spending, but that money has to go into an account that'll be similar to a 529 plan. So if anybody's ever had a 529 plan, you know that, at least in the state of Missouri here, that money has to go into the market. So if it has to go into the market, and Trump stipulated, and we'll see how the IRS interprets this down the road, but he stipulated that it has to go in the U.S. stock market. So if we have these $1,000 payments going in to the market every time there's a baby born, that's forced buying into the market, which will drive prices up. Then parents, grandparents, family members can fund up to $5,000 per child into these accounts per year. Now, that's an aggregate between everybody, not each, but still $5,000 going in this account, which also goes into the stock market. These accounts are also tax deferred. So They are not tax deductible when you put money into them, but they are tax deferred until the kid takes it out. Now, they have to be 18 to take out a portion, and then when they're 30, I believe they can take it all out. And that's just going to be a huge amount of growth. That money will become dusty, it'll grow a lot, and it will not be sold really for any reason because there's nowhere to put it except for when they start taking it out long from now, right? So if we think back to COVID and these $1,300 tax payments, these refund payments, if you will, that we got, stimulus payments, those drove markets in a huge way. And that was one time, not every year, not per kid. It was very, very growth oriented when it came to the markets. And I think that this will be even more so, especially 2, 3, 4 years from now when these accounts really start to take hold.
Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group. We're talking about the one big, beautiful bill that was signed on July 4th by President Trump. Again, we're offering our Floyd Financial Group Retirement Review. If you would like to talk to us here at Floyd Financial Group, that's Randy or Jake, and have a conversation about how this one big, beautiful bill may affect your journey towards a confident retirement, you can do that by calling 417-889-7233. You can do it right now. No cost, no obligation. No judgment for this conversation. It's 417-889-7233. Jake, let's talk about who supported it and who did not support this one big, beautiful bill. Mostly Republicans supported it. I think there were a few holdouts, weren't there?
Yeah, you had the fiscal hawks such as Rand Paul and Representative Massey, Tillis, the usual suspects that, while I do respect the fact that they want to be fiscally responsible, and there really is no such thing as a fiscal conservative anymore. The Republican Party used to be the party of sanity when it came to spending. Now both parties just spend money like crazy. And I do respect them for standing up. They also don't have any solutions. Picking on Rand Paul for a minute, Paul votes no on everything, but yet he never has any solutions to any of the problems. It's just, does it involve spending money? Then I vote no. The Democrats didn't support it, obviously, because Trump does, and it would be political suicide for them to support something that Donald Trump wants to have happen. So that's where it's going to get really interesting over the next months here. I think it's likely we'll have a vote on no tax on Social Security. That bill currently, which was brought by Representative Massey, only has, it's like 3 or 4 pages. I mean, it's a very, very short bill. And basically the only thing it talks about is eliminating the federal tax on Social Security. So that puts Democrats in a very tough spot because they either have to side with Trump or they have to vote against the people who put him there, all their constituency, maybe 99% of them who would want taxes to go away on Social Security. So it puts them in a tight spot. I suspect that they will vote against it, which seems crazy because it's definitely something the Democrats would want, the voters would want. But I think siding with Trump, like I said, is basically political suicide for them. I think that the best case scenario is for them to not support it, the Democrats, and it pass anyway, because we have a slight majority. I'm sure Rand Paul and others would vote against it, but we know that Massey brought the bill. So Massey voted against and was a very vocal opponent of the big, beautiful bill. But when it comes to his own bill, I'm sure he's going to vote for it. So it seems like they may have the votes for that, but we'll have to see.
Well, the natural question that I would have, of course, everyone receiving Social Security is for not taxing Social Security benefits. But if we don't tax Social Security benefits and we're eliminating other taxes and we have a deficit, where is the deficit going to be made up? I mean, how do we make progress on this deficit?
Yeah, so there's a lot of answers to that question. One is tariffs, right? So the tariffs are going to bring in more revenue than no tax on Social Security would possibly ever eliminate. And that's just one aspect. As we cut corporate taxes, cutting taxes on individuals is not necessarily a huge driver, but cutting corporate taxes really creates a lot of tax revenue because most economists agree that a dollar, every time it's spent, it works its way through the economy somewhere between 5 and 7 times. Meaning, if I earn $1 here and then I go buy a car with that dollar and the dealership guy gets a commission, then he goes and he gets his haircut and that's another $1. And then the guy doing the haircut goes grocery shopping and he has another $1, right? So you have, every time that money gets spent, the more pro-business everything is, the more likely that dollar is to go further. Every time it goes, it gets taxed each time, but it creates value as it goes through the system. That's the basics of Reagan-era trickle-down economics, and so that's going to create a lot of revenue. Most of the analysis of Trump's big, beautiful bill, if you will, really negates a lot of the benefits and a lot of the tax revenue that it will create. They just ignore that. They just focus on what it's going to cost. So I would say that 10 years from now, this bill and the no tax on Social Security even is probably not going to add much to the deficit. I think what will add to the deficit is other things that we're spending on, entitlement spendings and Social Security, that kind of thing.
Talk with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group, about the one big, beautiful bill. And Jake, I want to continue this conversation to talk about the effect on retirees insofar as Social Security, Medicare goes. But before we do that, once again, 417-889-7233 is our telephone number. You're listening to the program today. You'd like to sit down and talk with Jake or Randy at Floyd Financial Group about your retirement, whether or not you're up to snuff there, if there's some things that you could do to enhance it. Maybe there's some holes in that. We would love to help you. 417-889-7233 is our telephone number. It's not going to cost you a dime. No cost, no obligation, certainly no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. Go ahead and make that call right now at 417-889-7233. Leave your name, telephone number. Ashley will call you back on Monday and set up that appointment for you. And again, no cost, no obligation. 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Time for a break. We'll continue our conversation about the one big, beautiful bill when Show Me the Money continues right here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready to climb a mountain of financial know-how? Good, because it's time for more Show Me the Money with your financial Sherpa, Jake Floyd.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this segment, we're going to be talking about what we have been talking about, which is the big, beautiful bill and how it will affect you.
And for those retirees, people that are on Medicare, there's a lot to talk about here. We're going to also talk about Medicaid a little bit. Now, as we mentioned in the last segment, Jake, we're not eliminating taxes on Social Security just yet, but I understand that that is not exactly dead, right?
There's a bill floating around out there to do that, but there are some benefits baked into the big, beautiful bill that we're about to talk about here that affect seniors and people taking Social Security. So,
all right. So what is this in the big, beautiful bill that will affect people taking Social Security if you're 65 plus?
Yeah, so there's an extra tax deduction of $6,000 per person for people age 65 plus that are on Social Security. So it's kind of like expanding your already very large standard marital deduction if you're on Social Security. And so this was a way to kind of throw an early bone to people who voted for Trump to get rid of taxes on Social Security. He wanted to have something in the bill to do that. This is going to be a pretty big help, especially if you have pension income and other larger income payments in retirement. This is going to really help quite a bit with tax savings for everybody, but definitely people who are making more money in retirements that are paying higher taxes.
Well, when you think about it, with a standard deduction in 2025 of $30,000, Jake, when you add $6,000 per person for a married couple, that's an additional $12,000. That's a $42,000 deduction right off the top. I don't think I'm going to argue with that.
One of the things that's not immediately obvious is if we have a larger deduction, then that means a higher threshold before your Social Security gets taxed at all. And then at 50% and then 85%, those thresholds are now $12,000 further away after deductions. So I think that's an important thing. And this will create a situation where quite a few people, I mean, just back of the napkin math, I would guess maybe 15 or 20% of people that were paying taxes before on Social Security may not be as a result of this. So everybody gets a break, but some people are going to get tax-free Social Security, just like Trump promised them.
Jake, does this bill affect health care and Medicare benefits?
Jeff, it does a little bit. What I would say is it does not gut entitlement spending the way Democrats would have you believe and the way they've been whining about that he's cutting entitlement spending. DOJ has been trying to eliminate waste in there, but there's no big sweeping cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and all that kind of thing. There are some little spots where some of the funding has been reduced that could potentially affect vendor Medicaid, which is like nursing home Medicaid and things like that, but not your people who can't afford health insurance type Medicaid. That's a different Medicaid.
Jake, I had heard, and probably erroneously, some people were saying, well, we're not going to get Medicaid, but that's not exactly true, but there will be some requirements for getting Medicaid.
Right. So if you have a couple in a household and low income, you have to have at least one of those people working 32 hours a week, I believe it is, in order to be eligible for Medicaid. Now, if they're both disabled or something like that, I'm sure there's going to be exemption for that. But I think people just don't like the idea that they can't just sit around and get 3,000 or 4,000 a month in food stamps and Medicaid and free health insurance. And I think if you have two healthy people in a household, that personally, I think they both should be working if they're getting Medicaid to be eligible. Yeah. But certainly having one of them working is not the end of the world. And let's be honest, 32 hours a week is not a lot of working.
Let's talk a little bit about retirement savings for current retirees, 401ks, IRAs. Are there any changes that are going to be happening there?
Yeah, Jeff, there's not a lot of big changes to that, but the higher standard deduction that we were talking about for seniors will affect a little bit about how much if you're still working after 65, how much you may want to fund into a retirement plan because you have a higher deduction. You may not need to fund as much to stay under the 22 bracket, for example. There's some minutia there, but there's no big sweeping changes to how much taxes you're going to pay on pension income or the strategizing thereof. I would just say everybody's getting that slight tax break over the age of 65.
So as you said, Jake, the bill is 900 pages here, and I'm sure we can't talk about everything in all the 900 pages, but I did want to talk about the impact on investors with taxes, investment strategies, and market reactions. Taxes on investment income. Will the current tax rate brackets change at all?
No, Jeff. I think the capital gains brackets are going to remain the same. The tax brackets are going to remain the same. One of the versions of the bill had increased tax brackets for capital gains and or raising the top capital gains rate or adding a wealth tax, but none of that stuff made it through. So it's going to be kind of business as usual on investment income.
And in the past, we have talked about SALT here, and I'm not talking about strategic arms limitation talks. This is state and local taxes. For those people who did not hear the first part of the program, Jake, what effect does this have on the state and local taxes?
Yeah, so effectively, if you pay state taxes, you get double taxed on that money because you're paying the federal government and then you're paying the state government on a portion of that money. What the SALT deduction does, state and local tax is what that stands for, is it eliminates the double taxation and you get a deduction for your state taxes at the federal level. So basically, if you pay $40,000 per year or less in state taxes, then you get to deduct all of that off your federal taxes. So it's not a huge deal for a lot of people listening to the show unless you've got, let's say, $250,000 in income or so is where it's going to really start to hit you. But a lot of people in California, New York that pay a lot higher taxes are going to benefit quite a bit from this. So while double taxation is unfair, that probably benefits California, Illinois, New Jersey, New York more than it does us, although having a 5% local tax here, it will help us some.
Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group, we're talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill and how it may affect you, our listeners. Again, our phone number, 417-889-7233. If you'd like to talk to Jake on a personal basis or Randy when he's in the office, no cost, no obligation. Certainly no judgment, 417-889-7233. You can make that call right now. Leave your name, telephone number, and Ashley will set that up for you. If you're an investor, Jake, with a 401k, maybe some stocks, does this change your investment strategy, do you think?
I would say the bill itself does not really. I would just say there's going to be more money to go around. You know, if you are a ways from retirement, you might consider your risk tolerance again, just because we don't want to go outside your risk tolerance, but we do want to be as aggressive as you're comfortable with, because this is likely going to drive returns for several years to come, not just this bill, but artificial intelligence and other things like that. Again, we need to be careful with how much risk you're comfortable with, how much risk you're capable of taking, you know, how much you should be taking, but it's hard to look at this and not imagine markets expanding big with all the different influxes of capital that are going to happen over the next 2 to, let's say, 10 years.
Jake, I heard something that this One Big Beautiful Bill would help small businesses. How's it going to help those folks?
Yeah, to be honest, Jeff, I haven't got all the nitty-gritty detail on exactly how this is going to work, but small business stock that's been held over 3, 4, 5 years can be excluded at different rates as far as gains on that small business stock. This provision, as well as a lot of these provisions, are going to have to be reviewed by the IRS, and then what typically happens when we have something that's a little vague in a bill like this is the IRS will at some point issue a ruling, and then that ruling becomes part of the tax code where that shows how something's going to be treated. So a good example of this was when they started making, during the Secure Act, started making people take out inherited IRAs over 10 years instead of over that person's lifetime. In the beginning, it just said, hey, you have to have it out in 10 years. So people weren't taking anything out, and they were just going to wait 10 years and then take it all out at once. And then the IRS came back and said, hey, no, you have to be taking RMDs and have it out in 10 years. And so they clarified that. So I have a feeling there's going to be a flurry of that kind of thing happening around this bill over the next 6 months, and maybe even into tax season of next year, where as tax preparers start to bring some of this to the table, people are like, well, how exactly does that work? And we're like, well, the bill doesn't say. So, excuse me, Mr. IRS, how does this work? And as we know, we have the esteemed, depending on whether you you like him or not, the esteemed Billy Long, who's from this area, who's the head of the IRS. I would imagine that he's not going to be super ambitious, so I would say that you're probably going to see some of this left up to the tax preparer as far as how aggressive they go after the gray area, I guess, in this bill. That'll be interesting to see. But yeah, small business in general has a few tailwinds built in here.
So, Jake, all this is well and good. I'm really loving some of the tax savings here, as I'm sure our listeners are. How long is this bill going to affect our taxes? Is it permanent? Does it have an expiration date?
Yeah, so the majority of this bill is kind of in perpetuity until they change the tax law. So when Trump did the tax cuts initially, all he could do was get it done through the end of 25. So this pretty much extends those tax cuts indefinitely, as well as some of the new provisions. There are a few things in here, so like the SALT tax deduction is through 2029. There's some of these provisions that are through 27, but the vast majority of it is looking forward in perpetuity. Now, that doesn't mean the next administration can't come in and just change it, but at least we will not be under the gun the way we were this year trying to get it done.
Talk with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group about the One Big Beautiful Bill. Again, our telephone number, 417-889-7233. Listening to the program this morning, you want to have a casual conversation with Jake or Randy, no cost, no obligation. You can ask anything that you want about your retirement journey, including how the One Big Beautiful Bill may affect your retirement. 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll wrap up our conversation here about One Big Beautiful Bill and more when our program continues on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
People of the Ozarks, step away from the fishing pole and prepare to be shown the money, because we're back with more straight talk and honest answers with Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this last segment, we're going to finish up talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
And Jake, we talked a little bit about the long-term tax implications. As you said, some things are expected to be permanent. Others will expire 27, 28, 29. For those things that are permanent, is there a chance that a different administration is going to come along and undo all of this good stuff?
Well, it's been said that there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
Right.
So all that aside, I do think that this will definitely be a huge target if we end up with a Democrat in office, or maybe a socialist, who knows. This will be a big target to gut this and try to tax people more, not less. I would say that if you make generally, a couple 100,000 or less in this country, though, that you're not going to be the target for a while, because that's the majority of voters. And voters, while not all of them are intelligent, people are more aware today that voting affects their taxes. Who gets in office affects their taxes. And so as people go to vote, most people are simply focused on themselves. That's a little short-sighted, but it's the truth. So people are generally not going to vote for a tax increase on themselves. And so I think that people 200,000 and less or so in a year in income, adjusted forward for inflation, are probably going to not have their taxes raised by either party anytime soon, in my opinion. But I do think that it's likely this bill will be a big target and a big running point, or a campaign promise for either a fiscal conservative in the future, or certainly any liberals or Democrats that are running will use this as a stump speech. We're going to get rid of the One Big Beautiful Bill. I think we'll see that in the near future.
Well, I'm excited about the Big Beautiful Bill, and especially the tax implications here. You talked about the $6,000 per person for people age 65 plus. So When does this all begin? Can we deduct the $6,000 this year, or do we have to wait for a few years before this all kicks in? When can we realistically expect that this bill is going to have its effects?
Yeah, Jeff, most of the bill will take effect as of January 25, meaning as you file taxes in 26 for 2025, you'll be able to take advantage of these new tax cuts. I think you're going to see the market and asset prices start to reflect this over the next little bit. Now that this is passed, people are going to be like, wow, that means we're going to have more money. That means we're going to have more refunds, because a lot of people were saving money going into this bill like there are no tax breaks, right? And so as they get their paychecks done, the tax rate is holding like these tax breaks don't exist, which means when they get to April 15th or whenever they file their taxes, that they will likely owe less in taxes than what they thought they were going to, which means you'll have bigger refunds. Bigger refunds equals more spending, more investing. It'll be kind of a cascading effect when it comes to the stock market, gold, all asset prices, real estate, Bitcoin, whatever it may be. I think you're going to see a tailwind to all those things.
Jake, when we look back at the Trump presidency, Trump 2.0 as we call it, do you think that this is going to be probably one of the biggest achievements of his administration?
I do think that that will be a major bullet point for sure. I think what will probably overhang more than anything, though, will be how he affects immigration. He talked very tough on immigration, said we're going to deport every one of them, which obviously is not going to happen just simply because you can't find every one of them. I do think generally he's doing a good job, but his numbers are way less than the pace that would be needed to deport, let's say, 10 million illegals that crossed the border in the last 5 years. So I think people in his legacy will be focused on what happened to asset prices under his rule. Since they insist on calling him the king, we'll call it his rule. And then how he dealt with immigration and what lasting effects Trump's immigration policies, ICE and other things have 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. Because there's some speculation even right now whether or not farm workers are going to be granted amnesty if they're illegals simply because they're having a shortage. That's a little unclear as to whether that's fake news or whether that's coming from somewhere in the Trump administration that's being considered. I would kind of be shocked if he did that, but at the same time, people got to eat and you got to have food on the table, so it'll be interesting. But I think that those three things, the tax bill, the prosperity of assets under Trump, and immigration will be the three things that he's going to be remembered or scrutinized for.
Jake, as a result of the radio show here, we do get questions once in a while. I want to pose some of these to you. First one is, I'm 60 years old, planning to retire in 5 years. Should I be thinking about changing my savings plan as a result of this big, beautiful bill?
Jeff, I would just say that it emboldens all the feelings that I had before toward the market, where we thought things were going to go higher pretty aggressively. I would say this just adds fuel to that fire. And if you're going to have more money, one of the keys to saving money when you start working is to pay yourself first before you pay the bills and pay everything else. So if you learn to live without 10% of your income, let's say, then you'll never miss it when you're saving it. And that's a good rule of thumb. When you get a raise, I encourage people to, if you get a 3% raise, let's take 1% of that and put it in a retirement account, because it's already more money than you're used to having. So we'll just slide that over here, and then your retirement account will be that much bigger. I think this is something that can be looked at that way, where if this is money that you were not counting on and you're paying less in taxes, you're going to get a refund, and then next year's taxes, it'll just hold out that much less. You could adjust your retirement savings upward without really affecting your lifestyle. And I think that would be a good idea, especially if you're behind on retirement savings, to take advantage of that.
Next question is, will my stock dividends or capital gains be taxed more now?
Yeah, so stock dividends and capital gains are not going to be directly affected, other than through the fact that you'll actually pay a little less in taxes, just because if you would have been paying taxes on those otherwise, some of the other tax breaks may be in effect to have you pay a little less in taxes, especially if you're over the age of 65.
And our next question relates to the 529 plans. What about college savings? Are 529s affected? Yeah,
so the 529 plans have been expanded as to what they can cover, especially kindergarten through 12th grade. It's been expanded to cover books and tests and special therapies, things like that. You can also enroll disabled family members into programs without penalty. So it makes it a little bit more flexible, which wouldn't be difficult because 529s are one of the most rigid instruments out there. I know quite a few people that have funded 529 plans that have their money basically stuck and they don't have any way to get it out. So I think anything there would be welcomed.
If you are planning for a child or grandchild's education, Jake, this may be a little bit off topic, but would you suggest that the 529 plan is not the only way to go?
For sure. There's a lot of financial gurus that are so focused on taxes, so focused on all these benefits, either from 529 plans or HSAs, or people that are super hyper focused on Roth and that kind of thing. Sometimes it's nice to be able to just have access to your money. And as a younger investor myself, there are times where I end up paying taxes that the CFP would say, or the guru would say, that I should not be paying simply because I don't want to wait till I'm 59 and a half to have my money. So I think every person is unique and there are not blanket answers for everyone. But personally, I think liquidity and access to your money is worth a premium, especially if you're 35, 40, 45 years old, where you might want to use that money to buy a business or fund a down payment on a house or whatever, where if it's in your retirement accounts or a 529, you can't do that. So I value flexibility higher than probably the average person, but that's just because I know that life is change and people make grand plans and then those plans are obliterated in an instant and we wish we had flexibility. So I like to build flexibility not only into my plan, but I like to build it into everybody else's plan too. So I'm not a huge fan of 529 plans because I don't think the benefit outweighs the risks of having that money tied up or the lack of flexibility. So I would say, yes, we have other ways that we like to take care of that.
We're talking about the big, beautiful bill with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. Final question, Jake. All this sounds like great news, the big, beautiful bill, but are there any catches?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a catch here, and it's going to remain to be seen, everybody can weigh in and guess at the overall impact on our government debt. But ultimately, they're all guesses. They may be educated guesses, but all the projections of, well, this is going to add $5 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. But that totally negates the potential of the tariffs that weren't there before, which is about $3 trillion over the next 10 years. All the trickle-down economics that I talked about earlier that's going to drive more tax revenue that way. Personally, I don't think it's going to explode the debt the way Elon seems to think it will, or others. It's also important to remember that economists are among the most liberal people on earth. In fact, there was a report I was looking at that said that 87% of tenured economists vote Democrat. So you have to understand these people are out to get Trump. And if that means attacking his bill, that's exactly what they're going to do. I don't see anything in here that's going to really explode the deficit. I don't think it's going to save a lot of money either, but it is going to drive America forward, drive America first, and it's going to benefit business owners in America. It's going to benefit people who work here. It's going to benefit blue collar and white collar and the ultra wealthy, and that's okay. I don't think that should be a deal breaker. So I see a lot of positives. If there's a negative, it's government debt long term, but if we can grow our economy enough, then we can get around that by generating more tax revenue in the future. So I don't see anything that's really giving me a ton of pause here.
We've been talking about the big, beautiful bill with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. And again, if you have questions of Jake or Randy here at Floyd Financial Group, you'd like to get in and sit down and have a casual conversation with these gentlemen, 417-889-7233 is our telephone number to set up that conversation. Again, there's no cost, no obligation, certainly no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, it's been a great conversation with you, but unfortunately we're out of time for this week. So for Jake Floyd, I'm Jeff Shade, wishing you a great weekend. Thank you so much for making us part of your weekend. Be sure to join us again next week right here with another edition of Show Me the Money on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
The information provided in the preceding program is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representations as to its completeness or accuracy. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Financial planning is offered through Floyd Financial Group, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.